Hi, welcome to episode 4 of a Bible Primer. My name is Doug. In this episode, we're going to be speaking about the history that's within the Bible. If you think like I think, the history is significant because it helps you put yourself, helps you let you know where you are in history in the Bible. It helps to connect. It helps to bring a continuity to what you're reading. And I've divided the Bible up into 8 different segments, into 8 different eras of time. And each one has got a slightly different flavor to it. When you read them, there's a slightly different flavor to them. They've got a different significance to them. And we're going to go over the 8 segments, the 8 eras right now. So the first era is the pre-Diluvian era. Now, pre-Diluvian is a very fancy word. It means before the flood. We're talking about the flood of Noah. And in this era, we see the world, the whole universe get created. We see the creation of man. We see the fall of man. We see the introduction of sin into the world and how wicked the world becomes, so much so that the Lord decides to push the reset button, the flood of Noah. When Noah comes out of the flood, it's about a year later, we enter into the patriarchal era. The patriarch is a father head of a family. So the patriarchal era now narrows down to one family. When we were in the pre-Diluvian era, we weren't looking at one family in particular, we were looking at mankind. When we come out and we look and we're in the patriarchal era, we're looking at one family, particularly Abraham and his family. He is the patriarch, and his son, his grandson are the patriarchs. It'll be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who changes his name to Israel, giving Israel its name. And Jacob, or Israel, will have 12 sons, which will become known as the 12 tribes of Israel. This era covers from the ark into a point where there's a famine in the land, and the family of Israel, about 70 in all, go into Egypt to escape the famine, and they are welcomed as guests of the state. They're very highly esteemed. They spend about 400 years in Egypt, and a lot can happen in 400 years. The 2 main things that happen when we come to this next era is that, number one, they won in about 70 people in all as a family. They're coming out over 1 million people strong. They also went in highly esteemed as guests of the state. They're coming out as slaves. This era that they're coming out into is the theocracy era. Theocracy is another fancy name, which simply means God ruled. In a theocracy, you have God and you have the people. What you do not have in between is a king, a president, a prime minister. You don't have a government in between. God is the government and the people. So that's what a theocracy is. In this era, you'll see Moses lead the people out of Egypt. They will spend 40 years wandering around in the desert. The leadership will switch over to Joshua, who will lead people into the promised land in a 7-year conquest. And then the land will find rest. And he's very successful in it, by the way. And then the nation of Israel will find rest and begin to occupy the land, and they will be ruled by judges at different times throughout the next 200 and some odd years. What they find out in the theocracy era is that people don't make for a good theocracy. God rules just fine, but the people, they don't listen so good. So they realize this. They have their ups and their downs throughout this era in the Judges, and they call for a king. So the last judge of Israel is a gentleman named Samuel, and he anoints a king for them. This enters into the monarchy era. There are really only 3 kings of the monarchy era: Saul, David, and Samuel. Now, this in the theocracy era, the 10 tribes of Israel really behaved more like a confederacy than a nation. What Saul, David, and Solomon were able to do is they were able to consolidate them into a one unit nation. And more than that, this enters the high apex of Israel's history. They become, through David, who was a warrior king, through Solomon, who had great wisdom, so through battle and through wisdom, especially in commerce, they become the powerhouse in the region, more powerful than Egypt, more powerful than any of the nations around them. They become richer than almost any of the nations around them. They are just at the apex of their existence. Last for 3 kings, the third one being Solomon. The problem is Solomon has a son, and he's not so smart as Solomon is. So then we enter into his son Rehoboam is king. He threatens to raise the taxes on the Israelites. They rebel. There's basically a bloodless civil war that goes on at this point. 10 tribes to the north leave the kingdom that's based in Jerusalem, and you have a divided kingdom. I'm sorry, this era I call the divided kingdom era, and the 2 kingdoms become the northern kingdom, maintains the name of Israel. They are comprised of 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom comprised of 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, and they pick up the name of Judah. So this era is a time when Israel is divided. There's really 2 Israels. There's an Israel to the north and Israel or Judah to the south. And it is no longer at the apex of they're no longer at the top of their game. This is slowly they are losing strength, they're losing money, they're losing standing in the neighborhood. They're slowly going downhill. After a couple hundred years, Israel will be taken over by a nation called Assyria, and 100 and some odd years after that, Judah will be taken over by a nation named Babylon, go into exile, and for a period of time there's a remnant, but there's literally no Israelites in Israel. They're in exile. This enters into an era that I call the defeated Israel. The Israelites, Judah or Israelites, are all in exile. In Babylon, you'll read stories about Daniel in the lion's den, or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being thrown into a furnace. You may have heard of these. Persia will conquer Babylon, and in Persia you'll read the story of Esther. When Persia conquers Babylon, Cyrus is the Persian king, and he releases the Israelites to go back to Israel, those who want to. Now, they spent 70 years in exile. Many Israelites don't. They've got a life in Babylon, but many Israelites do go back to Israel, and they will rebuild the temple, which has been destroyed. They will rebuild the walls that have been destroyed, and that pretty well brings it to the end of the Old Testament. Then you go through about 400 years of silent years, called the silent years, between the Old Testament and the New Testament. And like we said before, a lot can happen in 400 years. Persia will lose to Alexander the Great of Greece, and Israel then is controlled by Greece, and Greece will lose to the Roman Empire, and Israel is then controlled by Rome, and the Roman Empire is that controlling empire when Jesus is born, which brings us into the Gospel era. It's a short era. The life of Christ. You can read about the birth of Christ, great Christmas stories. You can read about the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. This is our Easter stories, and in between you read about the ministry of Jesus, the miracles that he's done, the teachings that he's taught. And after the gospel era is the church era. I say it starts about 50 days after the death of Christ on a day called Pentecost, when the Holy Spirit enters the remaining disciples. And the book of Acts speaks about the birth of the church. And to a big extent, we are in the church era still today, 2,000 years later. So that is the whole Bible in 10 minutes or whatever it was, and history-wise. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you can join me next time when we discuss the pre-Diluvian era in a little more detail. Thank you.